Greetings friends and welcome back to Personal Wine. In this tutorial I want to talk to you about some different design concepts that are used in graphic design that may come in handy to help you with your typesetting or placing images on your labels. These are loose rules of thumb that have been around in the art world and the design world for literally thousands of years. They're based on a couple of concepts. One is called the rule of thirds, and the other one is called the golden ratio. I'm not going to go too far into the history of these things, but if you do get curious, I recommend hitting Wikipedia or just doing a Google search on the rule of thirds and also the golden ratio. Now, I'm using another program, not exactly our label designer today, to demonstrate this, just so I can show you graphically how I want to explain to you these two principles. The first one let's talk about is the rule of thirds. What it's basically saying is when you're dealing with a square, actually when you're dealing with a square or a rectangle, you can apply the rule of thirds. But in this case, with a square, it's very easy to demonstrate what I'm talking about. If you divide your vertical distance and if you divide your horizontal distance into thirds, you will have 4 points where these thirds come together. And let me show you what I'm talking about. Now, if you were to say this vertical distance from the bottom to the top, 1, 2, and 3/3, and with the horizontal distance you had 1, 2, and then third here, where these lines converge, you get these 4 points. Now, you may not be aware of this, but you've watched television shows for probably your entire life without knowing, unless you study design, that this is being used and you're not even aware of it. And I'll show you exactly what I'm talking about. There's a popular artist out there in the music business that has an album cover that fits exactly into what I'm going to show you, and this may be really a surprise to you. Let me turn off the actual words here. Okay, check out this Carrie Underwood album. As albums tend to be square format still, even CD covers to this day are in this square format. You can see that if you take all of her hair and her face and kind of create and keep in mind that that's one general shape, it all converges right here where the vertical and the horizontal thirds come together. Right there, if you see what I mean, if you were to say that, let me show you really quickly what I mean by drawing this marquee. If I draw an oval, and then I'm going to slide it over, and notice how when I draw this oval, you can see that if you kind of keep in mind the shape of with her hair and her face and her hand over here, you get all of this as one object, and it's all converging right there. Isn't that amazing? And that is a very, very common aspect of design, using that rule of thirds and these 4 points to place subjects in a photograph or in a design. And it goes for the painting world with Rembrandt and Van Gogh and many of the very famous artists that you've seen work from. They also tend to follow these types of rules. So this is really, really handy for you when you're designing your own label. If you want to look like a real pro, you can just remember these simple little tricks. So let's turn off this marquee. Now, also, I want to direct your attention to how the text is placed in this design. Now, they kind of used her shoulder line here. Let me draw you another quick marquee. And just to show you what I mean, if you put her shoulder on the left side there over with the right side, they neatly put Carrie Underwood, her name, within that shoulder bracketing of her body, of her upper body. And what else did they do, in case you've been paying attention? Hopefully you've noticed what else they did. They placed the text, Carrie Underwood, and then the album title right where the middle third and where the bottom vertical thirds come together. They literally placed the text right on that third line. Also, I want to point out that they use the horizontal thirds in this design as well, in that this first quadrant here would be your first third, your second third, and then your third third. Well, where the second, the middle, and the third third come together, they put that play on right in there. And they weren't exactly right on it. They kind of moved it over a little bit. But again, they used the shape of her shoulders from shoulder to shoulder there as kind of a bracket for where they were going to place the text. But I just think this is an absolutely excellent example of using the rule of thirds in design. Now, I'm going to move on to something else which is called the golden ratio. I'm going to go ahead and turn off that Carrie Underwood album cover so I can show you. We still have our rule of thirds placement, and these are our 4 corners where these third lines converge. But there's another very, very interesting ratio that occurs actually in nature. And this is something you'll find out more about if you do a wiki search or a Google search on the golden ratio. And for some reason in nature, there's this magical ratio of 1.61 to 1. What this means is that if you take any square, right? Let's take this center square, for example, and then let's move my graphic here. And just to show you, if you divide any square by 1 to 1.61, by that ratio, there is this place where this imaginary point converges. I just put a guideline there to show you what I'm talking about. If I turn that off, you can see where that's coming together. 1 being the ratio on top and 1.61 being the ratio on bottom. Interestingly enough, if I turn off this guideline I just created, and if I rotate, let's go ahead and rotate this ratio graphic to show you, you can actually use the same principle and divide the square with a larger top part. I'm just going to place this guide right there about where they come together. And just to show you what I mean, turn off my bounding box there. You could also say that the square could be divided with the 1 of the ratio down at the bottom and the 1.61 of the ratio at the top. This is going on in design everywhere you look, in television, in movies, artwork, album covers, CD covers, photographs. It is very, very, very common. A lot of the architecture of the ancient Greeks and Romans, for instance, the Parthenon, is completely based on the golden ratio. For instance, you've seen the Da Vinci sketch where he draws the man with his arms and his body showing the proportions of the human body. The golden ratio is all over that design. And I want to show you really quickly just how interesting this is. Okay, so we had this golden ratio graphic, right? And you can see where I placed this guide. Let's go ahead and get rid of that guide real fast. And let's rotate our graphic back. I'm going to rotate it back around like this and show you the golden ratio applies to the square also in this respect as well. If I drag a guide, I can actually divide the square horizontally with that same proportion. And this is very common. You can see it in a website. Even in the personal wine website, this is used. Much of the content is placed in this 1.6 ratio, and then the sidebar sits in that 1 ratio area. So if you would imagine that this was actually the web page, here's a bunch of the content over here, and here's that sidebar content over here. That is being used right in front of you, and you weren't even aware of it. Now, if I remove this guide again, I'll turn off this bounding box. I'm going to rotate, I'll turn it right back on. I am going to rotate my graphic back again, and I'm going to show you how this applies to laying out your type in your label design. Now, let's turn off this 1.61 to 1 ratio quickly. I'm also going to turn off my rule of thirds 4 points. Now, I went ahead and already pre-designed some text for you, and this is kind of based on some of the other tutorials. It's a happy anniversary mom and dad label, and you're probably wondering why would I put my text the way I put my text. And I was so surprised, actually, guys, when I laid this out to find that I had placed my text using the rule of thirds and using the golden ratio, and I wasn't even completely aware that I did it. It's just after you've done enough design work kind of following those patterns, your eyes tend to find them. It's an actual phenomenon of nature that the human brain actually looks for this pattern when it creates designs and artwork. Let's put in our rule of thirds first. Notice how the happy anniversary fits exactly, almost exactly. The height of these letters fits on that line, on that upper divider between the top and the middle third. Now, mom and dad is somewhere in this limbo area, right? It's not exactly in the middle of this distance. Same with Love, Kira, and Todd. It's not in this middle distance either. But boy, was I surprised when I went and created my graphic for this tutorial that look what happens with the golden ratio. If I place my golden ratio bar in my square and slide it over, lo and behold, watch this. See, I have drawn this little green guideline going across our design, and mom and dad is fitting right between that upper 1 and that 1.61 ratio. My eyes and my brain did this without me even knowing it, and that is the honest truth. I just came in here and I laid it out and I said, how does my text look? Let's put my text on this page and let's let my eyes instinctively lay them out in this vertical position. However, as I mentioned before, I've been designing for a while, and so I've gotten accustomed to relying on these rule of thirds and the golden ratio techniques to help me in my design. And so it's now happening kind of involuntarily. It's just when I lay out my graphics and lay out my text, I tend to place them with that kind of thing in mind. So watch this. When I actually take this graphic for the golden ratio and I move it down to the bottom square, let's get it in there. We go. And let me turn off that green line. Well, I can leave it on just for the demonstration. Let's turn on this other graphic line that I created. Look at Love, Kira, and Todd. It is also falling within, right on the cusp of that golden ratio line. And that's, you can see that the square all the way from the top to the bottom, as I mentioned, this is the bottom third vertically. It is then being subdivided by this golden ratio, and look where this lines up. Okay, so when we go back to the label designer, I did want to point out to you that unfortunately in this version of the label designer we did not create that rule of thirds, nor did we create that golden ratio set of guides for you. The guides that exist actually are useful for centering more than anything else, but they're in a 4-square grid pattern. They're not in thirds. However, you can use your own eyes, and as you can see, this happy anniversary, Mom and Dad, Love, Carrie, Brad, and Sarah, is very similar to what I laid out for you here just a second ago, only when I used my mind's eye, that's where I came up with my golden ratio for the dividing and placement of Love, Kira, and Todd. And again, I'll just reiterate by moving this up. You can see Mom and Dad also lines up right there. And then Happy Anniversary appears right where the thirds come together. And remember how I showed you a second ago the Carrie Underwood demonstration for using actual images and the placement of the text. That rule of thirds and that golden ratio are really, really powerful tools to help you make great labels. And as I showed you a second ago with your own eyes, you can pretty much get into that, remembering where you're going to place your text based on rule of thirds and golden ratio without the actual aid. Of course, if you have Photoshop or if you have other graphic programs or friends in the graphic business, take some time to sit down with them one day and play around, and you'd be really surprised at how fascinating you'll find this stuff.